Taylor is a part of the Oregon Remembrance Project.
And we're here with Renee Browse.
And we are with Eddie Carrillo. So we are here with Michael Austin. Michael Austin is with Just Compassion. This morning with our special guest, Aaron Earlywine. We are talking this morning about immigration.
You know, I think to do this work, you have to have what I call unrelenting hope. And for me, part of that unrelenting hope is this belief that no matter where you go, you can find enough people who are willing to choose justice if given the opportunity.
And this is we end up dehumanizing people.
There is no greater determination of the value of life than the lives we are willing to take.
She said, I know what it's like to be hated. I know what it's like to be looked down upon because of who you are. And so I am here to protect you and to help give you support to know that you are not hated by everyone.
All right, welcome everybody to the next conversation, and I'm grateful each one of you are here, and welcome to our online community as well. A couple of homework items that we're going to accomplish first is there is a sign up for Sharia Bodner's wellness class. She has a class doing herb mixing and calming teas. And so if you are interested in that, please sign up with Sharia. And also she has as well a Google form that is guiding us in a skills bank. So if you want to participate in a skills bank, Sharia does have that QR code, which is up on the screen. You can point your camera to that and start filling out that form for a skills bank. A skills bank is basically your skill that you want to offer to the community. Like if you are good at A, B, and C, then go ahead and list that. Maybe it is doing something like tailoring clothes, or maybe it's woodworking, or maybe it's construction. Maybe you are a secret plumber with a plumbing certification that you want to participate, or maybe you are a baker of some kind that you want to teach people how to bake or to do some cooking of some kind in a skills bank format. So that is the QR code for us. I am with Preston Sleeger this morning. Preston, you can have a seat if you want. Okay, all right. Preston is a retired regional environmental officer, and to celebrate Earth Month, we are doing a month-long series through environmentalism. And environmentalism is an important topic. For me personally, I was an environmentalist and have been an environmentalist for most of my adult life. And when talking about environmentalism, it's an important integrated subject. It's not this subject over here. It's an integrated subject that we're going to talk about today. We are using for this topic the oil spill of the New Carissa, which is a boat that beached itself near Coos Bay, and that is the story lens that we are looking through. And so you're going to see lots of pictures of the New Carissa, this ship that beached and broke apart on the coast of Oregon, as kind of our filter. So environmentalism at its core is not just the idea of protecting nature. It's not just that idea. That is an important part of it. But understanding something is important, that we are not separate from the environment. So it's also protecting life as we know it, economy as we know it, the physicality, economically, socially, all the things that are together that makes our community, our life. Environmentalism actually protects it because we're not separate from it. So the air we breathe, the drinks that we drink, the water that we consume, the food that we grow that sustains life, the systems are all interconnected. That's really important to understand because it's not an isolated subject like some people have treated it. It's not a subject over there. It's actually with us and within us. So to care for the environment in a real sense is to care for ourselves, but also generations that will come after us. So once we die, life goes on. I don't know if you know this, but when you die, life will continue, right? Life does not cease to continue when you leave the planet. And so future generations, like our Native Americans, look at generation after generation after generation. So they make decisions based on many future generations, not just their current or the next generation, just that short-sighted. They're not that short-sighted. So what makes environmentalism urgent and complex is this, is consequences are not, let's say, delayed, dispersed, and uneven. Okay, they are often displayed, excuse me, let me repeat that. Consequences are often delayed, often dispersed, and often uneven. So the consequences of how we treat our planet and what we do with our water and how we treat our food sources and the soil and such things, those consequences might not be seen for years to come. Those consequences might not be equally distributed. Usually they're distributed amongst the most marginalized people. That's who carries the effect of environmentalism. So plants or like plants meaning like a manufacturing plant is built next to marginalized communities. And so those plants and producing toxic waste, then who receives the effect of the toxic waste? The marginalized community, because it's cheap land. Cheap land then has marginalized communities amongst it. So the damage that's done often doesn't appear where it begins. It often appears later and often appears through water, through air, through ecosystems, through time, not just in the immediate. So communities are affected. Events like environmental disasters a lot of times remind us what we tend to forget. And disasters remind us that there is an economic, industrial, and political system that we work within. And when we have an environmental disaster, all of a sudden we see, wow, this actually affects our lifestyle. This actually affects us socially. This actually affects us politically. And we need to, not just the cost financially, but ecologically, communally, it's very deeply human. And we need to consider environmental disasters, not just in the loss, but in the effect of what it's doing to us as people. So oil is a big conversation right now. Iran, oil, Venezuela, that's been in the news a lot. And oil is this hot topic, the Strait of Hormuz. Right? Who knew about the Strait of Hormuz before the Strait of Hormuz hit the news, right? So all of a sudden now everybody, what's really interesting about war and environmental disaster is it's a like summarized lesson of geography for the American people, right? We're not good with geography. Where's the Strait of Hormuz? Where's Oman? Where's the Middle East, right? We're just like dumb when it comes to geography. And all of a sudden we go to war and we find out where Afghanistan is. Oh, that's a place, right? We find out, oh, Iraq actually exists. Wow, the Strait of Hormuz. Wow, that's where Iran is. So we get this really summarized quick lesson in geography, right? But we didn't know where the Strait of Hormuz is or was maybe a year ago. We've talked about gas prices in the news. We talked about oil barrels in the news. Just so you know, the price of oil, when it says the price of oil is $85, right? The price of oil is not $85. The price of oil in the market might be $85, but it's like $120 on the retail market, right? So just because the news is saying price of oil is 85, it's not selling for 85. And so we need to consider those kind of factors when it comes to when we're listening to gas prices or oil prices. One also little tidbit of information. Big ships don't run off of gasoline, right? They don't fill up at the station if unleaded, at 5.25 a gallon. They're not filling up at the station of gasoline. They run off of a very heavy, heavy, heavy fuel that when the evaporated substances and the burned off substances leave, you're left with a Tootsie Roll thick substance in the ship. And we're going to talk about that here in a minute. It's a very thick oil that a ship runs off of, a very thick fuel rather, that is sometimes not pumpable out of the ship. And so we're going to talk about that with the new Carissa. Here's a couple more things. When a ship breaks apart, you have an oil spill. No matter what ship the ship is carrying. The ship could be an oil tanker. The ship could be carrying wood chips. The ship could be carrying boxes, those big containers. When that ship breaks apart, you have oil spill. So something like the Exxon Valdez, some of you are old enough to remember the Exxon Valdez, that was millions of gallons of oil because it was a oil tanker, right? When you have a ship, you could be not millions of gallons, but you could be 250,000 gallon to 400,000 gallons of oil that dumps into the water. And that's a significant idea because it is a big deal. When a ship breaks apart, it is a big deal. So I looked up some statistics for us. On average, we get about 3 significant large oil spills out of ships every year. And a significant oil spill. So the Exxon Valdez doesn't happen every year, right? But about 3 ships a year break apart in the ocean. And that is 200,000 gallons of oil on average that spills into the ocean. Okay, so that's an important figure. But that's only about 3, right? Anywhere from 1 to 3 on average, let's say 2.5, right? On average, every year breaks apart in the ocean. A medium oil spill, right, which that's about 12 to 15. So we get 12 to 15 up to 199,000 gallons of oil, right? But it could go all the way down to 2,000 gallons of oil. So medium oil spills, about that range. 2,000 to, when you're talking big ships, 200,000 gallons of oil is not that much, right? No, that's not that much. If that was dumped into your living room, that would be a lot. But that equates to 1.9 million gallons a year of oil spilled in our waters. That's what that equates to. But the minor oil spills of 1,900 gallons or around that or less, okay, equates to the rest of the oil spilled into the oceans. So what hits the news is the big tankers that break apart, right? What's not really reported about is the under 199,000 gallons of oil. And what's really not reported is the 1,900 gallons. So it's millions of gallons of oil per year are spilled over a year into our oceans. Adding to this, okay, so now we're just like cruise ships and, you have all the things, right? I mean, you're talking we're just skiing on an ocean slick of oil. Adding to this, 2.1 million unplugged abandoned wells leak methane and contaminate soil in the United States. Just the United States. 2.1 million unplugged, abandoned, leaking oil wells. So the idea of drill, baby, drill, I'm sure Preston has a few things to say about that. Anyway, so let's welcome Preston Sleeger today. Yeah.
Thank you.
Preston is a longtime friend of our shop at Symposium, and a friend just personally. And he definitely has worked in this field for how many years? 50 years. So he is an expert when it comes to working with oil spills. He's going to walk us through something that is, well, famous. The New Carissa spill was a famous spill that happened in our state. And you'll see the ship right here. And this is the New Carissa, beached on Coos Bay. We're going to talk about first the idea or understanding the event. And then we're going to talk through basically the response to that event. And then we're going to talk about environmentalism again and the effect or the long-term effect and philosophically what it means to do cleanups and why we do cleanups and such. So I'm going to give it to Preston. He's going to walk us through, and then I'm going to respectfully interrupt him in this interview and ask him questions to help clarify, because most of us are not experts on big ship oil spills. We don't understand maybe the language and the technology, but we're going to look through this event through the lens of this event to talk about some deeper, deeply human type concepts when it comes to environmentalism. So Preston, walk us through some of these slides.
Great. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah.
This is the New Carissa. This was a ship that carried wood chips from the United States overseas. And it was coming back, so it's empty. So it's sitting high in the water. Louder? Sorry, I'm raspy. And there was a series of storms that were rolled into the coast. And this was caught in one of those storms. It was advised, they were advised by the Coast Guard to stay out at sea under power. They instead tried to anchor off the Coos Bay coast. And the ship wasn't big enough and the engines weren't big enough. It drug its anchor and got washed ashore. And that's it off the Coos Bay beach. So it's about in the middle of the picture, the coastline right there, just outside Coos Bay Harbor. The land around it was owned by the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Forest Service. The only way you could get to that spill was through a four-wheel drive, one-lane sandy road. So this is the type of environment this thing was in. It was storm after storm after storm that was rolling in. So a lot of our activities were dictated by the weather. These were the kind of waves, because even though it's sunny, those storms are still out there driving those waves in. So they tried to get it off the beach. They brought in a salvage team, folks from all over the world that respond to these types of incidences. And again, it's sitting high. And one of the problems was the engine wasn't strong enough to drive itself off the beach. And so the captain actually made it worse by turning the ship to the ocean. He should have driven it into the beach and then then not backed up, but actually go in at a 90-degree angle and turn it to a 45-degree angle.
Got it.
The
So,
super tanker captain told me
so
that.
this maritime, so it turns into an environmental accident because it's a maritime accident. Like somebody got bad intel.
So this, well, the captain
Got bad intel.
didn't know what he was doing.
Okay, yeah.
So this occurred. Initial grounding was on February 2nd. So it was a salvage operation for the
Can I
first
ask,
part of that.
was this a United States captain?
No.
Okay, so it was a foreign captain.
I believe the whole crew was Filipino,
Okay.
if I remember correctly.
Not that matters. It's just, I'm just wondering, because one of the criticisms of accidents in our news today is we have foreign or, like other countries coming into our waters and they're not as trained or whatever.
A lot of the crews are Filipino, and a lot of the crews are very well trained.
Okay.
But in this case, it was the captain operating the
Captain's not
vessel.
well trained.
Right.
Yeah. All right.
So because of its location, because of the problems with access, the vast majority of the operations were by helicopter. Thousands and thousands of hours getting people on board, getting the crew off. A lot of times in bad weather, these guys were some of the most amazing helicopter pilots I've ever seen. Next. So the initial response was to set up an incident command system. It's something that's used in fire and has been increasingly used in operations, and it's pretty standard. Brings all the parties together. They set up a command. They have planning. They have operations. They have finance. You have a unified command of the people, decision makers. In this case, it was the Coast Guard, it was the state of Oregon, and it was the responsible party or their representative.
Were you told to work on this? I mean, was this just your assignment, or were you drawn to this?
Well, as the regional environmental officer for the Department of the Interior, I worked for the Office of the Secretary. Within the department, there are numerous bureaus. In the case of New Carissa, it involved the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Bureau of Land Management, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So it was actually the Bureau of Land Management asked me to come down before the spill as part of the salvage operation, just to help oversee the operations for the Department of Interior.
Okay.
And where it came ashore was really BLM's front door in Coos Bay,
Yeah.
right off the beach line. The land inland from the beach was BLM land.
Okay.
So after being pounded by those waves for 7 days, the ship was slowly breaking apart. And this was the initial release of oil. It was estimated that it was 70 to 140,000 gallons of oil, just based on observation and experiences.
So the engine on the ship is sitting on the beach here,
Right.
and it's moving like this.
So the engine is in the stern of the ship. It was firmly affixed to the ground. The rest of the ship was floating, so it was getting pounded, and it had that pivot point.
Right. Okay.
And so the ship was going back and forth and was anchored at the base.
Right.
And so it slowly started to come apart. It slowly started to crack right and forward of the engine room.
Okay.
And within that ship like that, you had the cargo hold where the various cargo holds where the wood chips would go. Beneath that were the fuel tanks.
So all along the bottom of the
Bottom.
ship is fuel tanks, and then above that is
Right.
cargo. But this is empty, so it's light, so it's sitting here just
Correct.
flopping in the waves. Okay.
This was the initial response. Now, one of the problems we had were, again, the storms. You can see the weather. I mean, this is another storm coming in. And so the crews were out there hand cleaning. I've been responding to spills for 50 years, on and off. Before I became the regional environmental officer, I worked in environmental enforcement in the state of Maryland back in the early 70s. I was 19 when I started. It was at the very beginning of the environmental movement. It was before the Clean Water Act. And I've been probably on 1,000 oil spills, from a gallon to 500,000.
And what's interesting is since the 1970s, our technology, our builds of ships and all that have gotten better. So the large scale spills have actually decreased over the decades. Well,
Part of that is due to the Oil Pollution Act. The Oil Pollution Act was initiated after the Exxon Valdez. When the Exxon Valdez spilled 13 million gallons up in Alaska, the response fund that was available to the Coast Guard, it was called the 311K fund, and there was $6,000 in it. I know that because I tried to access it for another spill, and they didn't want to spend it because they only had $6,000.
Oh, jeez.
So they were fortunate with the Exxon spill in that Exxon paid for everything, and they were available, and they were able to pay for everything. So after the Exxon spill, they created the Oil Pollution Fund, the Oil Pollution Act of 1990. They set up a response fund of $1 billion based on taxes on oil, and that money was available to the Coast Guard and to everybody that was responding to this.
So this picture, if you go back to that one picture, because in our pre-work I am really surprised. What is there, like 15 people out there? So this is like ants trying to climb Mount Everest. You know, I mean, it's like just like the oil is just up and down the beaches, and here's, you know, a handful of people with shovels trying to fix it.
So I'll talk about that just briefly. In 50 years of oil spill response, it for the most part has not changed.
Yeah.
The technology has not changed that much. There are skimming devices, but essentially you're using oil spill boom and hand labor to clean these things up. Now you think, why not get a bulldozer out there and scrape up that beach? It does a lot more harm usually. It depends on where you are. You have threatened and endangered species out there with sandpipers. And so in the old days, get a bulldozer there, scrape up that beach, and you realize then that you're doing a lot more harm than the actual oil is. And as you can see, you know, it just spread out all over the beach. It's not this big solid glop of oil. So this is an oil spill boom. In the old days being the 80s, even the early 90s, we would be meeting at the command post and everybody would be arguing, where should the boom go? We only got so much boom, what should we protect? And so the resource folks, the biologists would say, you know, we want this protected. And the contractors are saying, we can't do that, or we don't have boom, there's not a lot of trust. So in the Pacific Northwest, we developed a response plan that we sat down when there was no oil in the water. And we said, okay, what are the important resources that need protected? We identified those, and then the response people sat down and said, okay, that's, you know, the current's too strong there, we can't do this, or we don't have enough boom to protect this. There were various reasons why you couldn't deploy protective equipment. And so you're doing it in a non-oil spill environment. There's a little bit more trust. And what we came up with was a response plan where all these areas are identified, how much materials are needed. The spill response contractors have this. In this case, this was out ahead of the spill.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an estuary upstream of that. So that boom was not to keep oil in, but to keep it out. And so there's not those arguments. I've had contractors go out, they have the same plan we do. They deploy this boom ahead of time without any direction. Okay, yeah. Oil spill boom, excuse me. That is, oil spill boom has gone. This is like a curtain, a plastic curtain with, you anchor it in this case, or there's deeper spill for out in the ocean that float to keep the oil contained behind the boom so that you can bring in skimmers and other devices to pick up the oil. Yes. It goes down into the water. In this case, this is an estuary boom where it's affected by tides. So it's flexible enough to go up and down. If it was a rigid boom, when the tide came in, the oil would go under it. Doesn't filter, it doesn't absorb oil, it just either keeps it in or keeps it out. Now there are other smaller booms, they're little sausage booms they call them, that have sorbent materials in them, and they deploy those. Not in this type of environment, this is just too big for that. Right. That would absorb oil. There's, again, the technology hasn't changed that much. The quality of the boom, sizes of the boom, the quantity of the boom has changed. Okay, these are called tar balls. The initial oiling of the beach, you saw the ribbons of oil out on the beach. Eventually what happens is stuff starts to break down, starts to break up, starts to sink, and it becomes a bunch of tar balls. There are probably tar balls coming ashore as now from this spill and from numerous other spills. But then this is what you're dealing with. How do you clean that up? You know, you can't use technology, you use people, and you can't get it all. So this is
Ominous.
one, it shows how big the ships are. I mean, it's just, you go out there and it's just amazing. And so on the left side of the picture, that's that black stuff. Those are called pom-poms, and they're essentially plastic, look like pom-poms, and string. And you can lay those in a surf zone. And so the waves go in and out, and it collects it. The oil adheres to it. And then you replace them daily. And then you get people out there with little shovels and plastic bags. And that's how you clean up the beach.
So there's the beginning of environmental damage right away. So these are obvious things. I mean,
Oh, absolutely.
You have basically tar balls ending up on the beach, then affecting populations of birds and fish and wildlife in general.
Oh yeah, it goes on, and you can't get everything. You know, you see three guys, and there's more out on the beach, but you see three guys with shovels. How much oil are you picking up with that? You're doing what you can. One of the problems were the storms. The priority was safety.
Yeah.
To get crews out there to clean it up, it was, you know, one day they would get out and work on it, and then a storm would come in. They'd be, you know, we'd be inside for 2 days, maybe just a day. So it was a sporadic response in this case because of the weather.
It reminds me of how like fragile like life is, and it reminds me of how like vulnerable we are when it comes to this ship is just huge, and then these people, there's 3 people out there with, you know, rain suits on and a shovel, and what kind of work are they actually accomplishing? It just reminds me of our vulnerability. It reminds me of our fragility. It reminds me of how natural our systems are and how the unnatural can affect the natural so easily. So let's take a break. Let's go to our tables. We have 5 questions. We're going to do 6 minutes. Go ahead and just talk about those questions. If you make it to 3, if you make it to 2, we're about ready to move into a section of the complexity of things, environmentalism. So go ahead and just walk through those questions for a couple of minutes, and then we'll go to our next section. point our attention back up to our screen with Preston Sleeger. Let's blow this boat up. That's what we're going to do. We're going to not only set it on fire, but we're going to blow it up with a submarine. So take it away, Preston.
Before we blow anything up, I just want to show you what we were dealing with. We would send people out to there's that better, on the beach and survey the beach to see where the oil is, biologists and such. And then they would come back, report, and set priorities as to what should be cleaned up. And then the operations folks will go out the next day and respond and clean these beaches up. Well, with all the storms we'd have a crew, team of biologists go out and say, okay, here's where the oil is coming ashore. This is a priority for cleanup. Storm would hit. The cleanup crews would go out and say, well, we can't find the oil. There's no oil there. And there was a lot of disbelief and a lot of mistrust initially. Well, then a team from NOAA went out, some of the folks who'd found the oil initially, and they dug down. And that black ribbon is the oil that they saw. This was from one storm. In one day, it covered it. That's about 12 inches of sand on top of it. So you're dealing in this very dynamic system where things were disappearing, things were moving.
So this is one day.
One day. There were other times where there was a couple days, and you'd have a storm come in and cover stuff up, and then maybe uncover it. So areas where you go out and go, well, there's no oil there, the storm would remove some of the sand, and all of a sudden there'd be oil. So it was very difficult to track that.
So you just leave this.
Yes, you just leave it. I mean, to dig that much beach up,
Yeah.
you're doing, you're doing more harm than good.
Right.
Okay, now, the ship was starting to break up. I was talking to the strike team guys on board the ship, and they were stepping over cracks in the deck. And that's where the initial release came from, was that initial cracking. Well, it was getting so bad that they knew the ship was going to break up. So we had to make a decision of how best to do this. And we eventually agreed on burning the oil. Well, this oil, as Kevin said earlier, is a heavier oil. It's heated on the ship to flow to the boilers. When it stops being heated and sits in that cold water, it gets very thick. Like, he stole my term, Tootsie Roll. You can almost walk on the oil. And so you can't just put a match to it. It's not like lighting a cup of gasoline. You need things like gasoline to burn it. So initially they were worried about the condition of the ship, and so they just used gasoline and someone said some thermo grenades to try to burn the oil, and it just wasn't enough. And so the next day the ship was really starting to go. So we brought in the Navy demolition guys. And they used Bangalore torpedoes, which they use, or explosives that are long. And they used, I think it was 4 55-gallon drums per cargo hold of napalm, essentially. It's Lumigel. And they use that in firefighting to set back fires. As a matter of fact, we had a forest guy who would mix this up for the Navy. So the explosives were below the decking from the cargo hold to the tanks down below, and then the Lumigel was to set the oil on fire, to have that initial heat source to burn that. And so this was that night after the initial explosion, and you can see it's burning pretty good. You can see the glow
within the ship,
the tank, within the tank, the tanks. What you can't see, and I was standing next to the guy who took this picture, are the cracks. As the waves come in, the cracks would open and then they would close, and you just see that ship breaking up. Could you go back to that real quick? To the far right, you see a dark spot. And what that was that was one where the decking didn't blow. And so this oil in there wasn't burning. It remained in there. Okay.
So now the ship is completely broken.
This is the next morning.
Right.
First thing in the morning, the ship is broken apart. The
Good
engine,
thing you burned it, because then we would have 250,000 gallons of oil floating around.
at least, yeah.
Yeah. Or up to 400,000, it was estimated, right?
There's total 400,000 on board, but
Yeah.
it would have been released. So it was a risk analysis. It was analysis of what's best for the environment. The big thing in burning it was determining what the weather conditions were going to be and where the smoke would go. There was air monitoring stations set up. The weather was blowing it to the north along the coast away from Coos Bay itself. And so there were minimal impacts from the burning.
So you have the BLM, the Forest Service, Indian Affairs, Department of Interior,
That's just what the Department of Interior was.
and all the people involved so far.
Oh, no, the U.S. Coast Guard, EPA, the state of Oregon.
And the
You had the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration. You had a lot of people that were involved in this, a lot of agencies,
So not basically eight or nine agencies.
at least.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, there's several tribes involved, 3 tribes involved. So it was
How many millions of dollars? We'll get to the slide.
on how much was spilled or
Millions
or
of
the cl-
dollars.
Oh, it was 20 for the restoration. It was $26 million. The actual spill response costs, I don't have.
Millions.
Oh, it was millions.
Millions,
Yeah,
millions,
yeah.
millions.
It was probably close to the same amount,
So 50
$20-some million.
for one ship with one bad
Right.
intel. Yeah.
Yes. Well, there were toxins in there. A lot of them evaporate. You know, the light fractions of the oil evaporate. And that's when it's out in the water, those light fractions evaporate. The oil gets heavier. You get things entrained in it, sand and seaweed, and then it sinks. So if you just left it alone, it's going to sink on its own. In this case, to keep the oil out of the environment, we thought the best option was to burn it. Yes. I mean, other than
But all that's in the air.
it's in the
Of
air.
course, yes. Like I think with all that toxin and all that.
Oh yeah, it's just it's once a lot of the fractions go off, a lot of it's just a physical hazard for the birds. And there's oil coming up on that beach as we speak. Little tar balls, not necessarily from this spill, but from previous spills, or ships coming into harbor dump their bilge water, which is the wastewater in the bottom, and a lot of that contains oil. This was a very tough decision to burn it. If we were inland around populations, we probably wouldn't have burned it. But because we had the right weather, we had the right window, we were able to make that decision. Like a day later, maybe not, because the wind would have blown it inland or it would have blown someplace more sensitive. But we were very fortunate we had the window at the time when we needed to do it. A day later, the ship would have broken up anyway. And this is just a quick picture of the wastes that are generated on a cleanup like this. This is just a small fragment of what was collected. You got decontamination standards, you got hazmat suits. And so this also generates a lot of waste that goes in the landfills. So when the ship burned, it burned everything except one of the tanks because the decking didn't blow.
That
And that
black
was
spot.
that dark spot on board the ship. And that contained, 60,000 gallons of oil roughly. And so we wanted to try to pump it out. This was one of the very nice days where the tide was out and you could walk up and touch the ship. So they had cut a hole in the side and they ran pumps up there into the ship and they tried to pump it out of the ship. As Kevin said, this stuff was like Tootsie Roll. I was talking to a guy from the strike team, the Coast Guard strike team. He says, there's no way they're going to pump that. And since then, because of this spill and this response, they have developed pumps that will now pump something this thick. And we didn't expect this to work, but you had to make the effort. Okay. So one of the things we had to do was bring in these, they're called Baker tanks. And we cleared an area for them on the sand dunes, and they were going to pump the oil into those and heat it and then put it in tank trucks and haul it off. Didn't get much from that. But one of the other aspects of this operation, before we cleared the dunes, we had archaeologists come in and make sure there were no cultural or historic resources out there.
This reminds me, and your question reminds me, there's a tension between like human need, human impact, and environmental unpredictability. So you have an environmental unpredictability that you're dealing with, and the spill is causing real human impact. And the treatment of it is causing real human impact. So you're dealing with that balance, which is difficult.
You don't realize when they clean it up
Right.
how much waste are generated. If you can collect the oil, you can recycle oil, but when you're dealing with sand and oil response equipment, booms, and you can clean a boom, but sorbent materials, that all has to go somewhere. So it was decided the best way to handle that remaining oil aboard the ship was to take it out to sea and sink it. And there's a lot of discussions about that. It wasn't an easy decision, but they couldn't pump it out and they had to get that ship out of there. And so it was decided to haul it out to sea. And there's usually the cables that they were going to attach to the ship to pull it off the beach. Okay. This real quick, up in the very top of the picture, that's, if you can see it, that's the stern of the ship. And we had surveyors out there from the Bureau of Land Management surveying the location of the ship, or the parts of the ship. As you can see, that top part didn't move very much. But the forward 2/3 moved quite a bit. They could tell you within a quarter of an inch how much movement there was in that ship. And that was important. And if you can show the next picture, that was important because if the bow of that ship moved much closer to the stern of that ship, they wouldn't have been able to set the cable to it and haul it off the beach. As you can see in that picture, it was getting real close. And that's the tug way out there. So between the tug and the beach, there were 3 big sandbars that they had to cross. So the tug couldn't get very close. We had special cable flown in for this. And they, on March 1st, they started to pull the ship off the beach.
Can we advance in slides because of time?
Okay.
Can we go towards
Real quick. Let me show you at this one, they got it off the beach March 2nd. They were taking it out to sea. And as you can see from that picture, there was a storm coming. It was blowing off the white caps. That night, they were getting 40 to 50 foot seas and 100-mile-an-hour gusts of wind. Next. And the cable broke and the ship started to come back into the coast. It came back in faster than it went out. Next.
And it ended up in
It
Walt.
landed up in Waldport. This is 2/3 of a ship. Been through all that. It was still afloat and came back in. So we moved the operations all down to Waldport. Okay. Was able to hook it back up, haul it out to sea, out in the deep water. And they put 400 pounds of explosives into the bow of the ship and set it off, and that didn't sink it. And then 69 5-inch shells from a Navy destroyer, and that didn't sink it. And what sunk it was a 1.4 Mark IV torpedo
Yeah.
from a nuclear submarine. We were told an asset from Bremerton was going out there. We thought that was the destroyer, and it was a nuclear submarine out there.
So now the Navy's involved.
Navy's been involved for
Yeah.
this. We had their people, their demolitions folks, and then we had their destroyers. And not many people knew the submarine was out there.
So some people don't understand, and I didn't understand this before meeting with you, that there is a direct relationship, and this teaches me the direct relationship between the environment and when things go wrong. So you have weather patterns, you have sea heights, you have the thing that went
Right.
wrong, but now you're dealing with all of these other factors. And these ships are so big that, even the biggest like bullets and explosives we have can't even sink these ships.
Right.
It takes $1 million torpedo.
So
from a-
someone told me the ship was sinking, but they just wanted to use it torpedo.
All right, with that, so we've blown up the ship. Okay, the ship is now sunk. So now let's take a break and 5 minutes to talk about a couple of questions. And to a close, and we're going to move into a new section that has a lot to do with environmentalism. So we have, Preston told me, we have 15 agencies right now involved or more. We've spent $25 million so far on this project. Not total, but so far, just for the response. And then we've had a destroyer shoot it with bullets, and we've also had a nuclear sub torpedo it, and now this ship is now at the bottom of the ocean. So this brings up the ocean, right? The realization is this: if we do not address our oceans, we are not addressing climate change. Okay, we can have 1 million electric cars on the road, which would affect it, but real change is going to happen in the oceans. So at the ocean floor, you have the surface of the ocean floor surface. That's, where all the weird animals live, right? With big bug eyes and kind of spiky things. That's the bottom of the ocean. The fisheries trawl the bottom of the ocean looking for those exoskeleton yummy animals that we eat in fancy restaurants. So they trawl the bottom of the ocean. That affects then the next layer, the deep ocean. Okay, the deep ocean is, where a lot of fish are just swimming in the deep ocean. But then what's called the epipelagic layer, which is the sunlight layer of the ocean. That's where the biome is, right? And that's the top layer of the ocean. That's where, you go out and you fish for those fun, colorful looking fish, or you see that when you're snorkeling or whatever in the sunlight zone. A lot of biome is in the sunlight zone. And something that is really important to address is, those seagulls that are irritating, right, when you're at the ocean, or those birds that are seabirds that you wonder, what are they for? Why do we have all of these seabirds? Why did nature create all of this wildlife that really, it's like you just poop in the parks, and you are dirty animals, right? That's what we think of seabirds as. Seabirds actually communicate something to us. They communicate ocean health and the sunlight zone, the epipelagic zone. They communicate the health of that zone. So the population of those birds, if they're up, the biome is healthier on the top of the ocean. They also work in a symbiotic way where they live in the trees or they nest in the trees, and they then transport organic materials out into the biome. So those birds that are irritating are actually signals. They're actually like red light, green light signals that the more there are, the healthier the ocean top is. My relation to this is raptors in Sherwood. 5 years ago, we had an out of control rat population in Sherwood. Now you're seeing more red-tail hawks in the sky, which it takes one red tail for every acre of land or 2 acres of land. It's actually more than that, to control a rodent population. If rodent populations get out of control, then disease in humans then persist. So the more raptors we have in the sky, owls, red tails, Swainsons, all the good things, kites and peregrine falcons, right? They keep the rat population down. That's healthier for human interaction with the environment, right? So the same is true for seabirds. They communicate to us that the ocean is healthy. It doesn't take that many seabirds to communicate this. It doesn't take that many seabirds to transport organic material into the sunlight zone of the ocean. So let's continue on our slides.
Just a quick note to that, between 1950 and 2010, the seabird population has dropped by 70% worldwide. So
And
that's quite the
also,
message.
some of these birds are endangered. So the environmentalists that, you know, are considered, oh, these liberal environmentalists, all they care about is the snowy plover. You know, what's your problem with the snowy plover? You know, they're just a bird. That bird is communicating and showing health of our seas. And we're, 70% drop means that we're in trouble.
Okay, so one of the things that was brought into this spill was the Wildlife Care and Rehabilitation Unit, self-contained. You have veterinarians come in. You have trained biologists coming in to handle the oiled birds that are brought in. Real quickly on the trailer, in the old days, before this spill, actually, this was the first big spill this was brought in. The Fish and Wildlife Service would go out to a spill up at Nia Bay, say up at the ends of the earth, and they want to set up a facility, and they would call me. And we were trying to find a facility. You need a lot of hot water. You need freezers for bodies. You need a lot of things that just aren't readily available. They take a lot of time. Well, this was brought on scene, and we were ready to go. And to the credit of the Coast Guard, they brought it in before we ever asked for it. Okay. Yeah, they use Dawn soap. Yeah, it's essentially what one of the things they use it. The commercials are true. They use a lot of Dawn soap. So, so people like to volunteer to help with the birds and stuff, and they want to go out and collect birds. Well, it's actually illegal. This is Fish and Wildlife Service biologists trained in this. They have contractors that have trained people to handle the birds. Most of those guys out in the sea have weapons at the end of their head, and it's a very dangerous thing to handle those birds. So it's actually illegal. We'll get the law enforcement folks after you. But these are trained people collecting these birds, and they're bringing them back to the center. So there's the young woman there is a veterinarian supervising the cleaning of the bird by one of the volunteers. If you want to get
involved in the back, just doing nothing, just like staring upon. Is that you and a younger age?
No, that must be a government guy. Different government guy like that.
He's an overpaid person. Just
actually, he's not one of them, but in an operation like this, you usually have Fish and Wildlife Service law enforcement person there because they're handling migratory birds. So one of the things, you clean a bird, you want to put it back out in the environment where you need, they bring in these little portable tanks, they put seawater in there, they give these guys a chance to recuperate. They are under normal, ideal conditions. They are in a very stressful environment. And so you want to make sure they're as healthy as they can be, fed and rested before you send them back out there. That's not how we did it in the old days. They would just toss them back out there. So 175 birds came into the cleaning station, 132 were released, and the remainder were either died or were euthanized. And that's one of the improvements is it's like a hospital, it's a triage system. You have a veterinarian or other trained biologists who are sorting these birds out for cleaning or euthanasia. Yes, it was for what we recovered, it was a good return. Of the estimated snowy plover population, 31 were captured, 17 were oiled, and all 31 were released. We had Spotted Owl Team, which was a multi-agency group right there. And so they were instrumental. It was the Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service, Oregon Fish and Game folks that have worked together over the years. So they were instrumental in how we handled them and how we responded to the oil spill. There were very strong restrictions on cleanup crews going down in this spot, the snowy plover area. Yeah, there's a question. Well, they know where they are, so their searches were narrowed to their normal habitat. And it was, again, we had the spotted owl team. The people had been studying these birds for years. So we were probably a lot more efficient with the snowy plovers than we might have otherwise been. Yes, they're threatened and endangered, and they still are.
And they live in old growth,
No, no, these guys live on the beach grass.
just beach.
Right.
Okay.
That's one of the reasons. And when they die, they become evidence. So that's another thing. And we'll touch on that real quickly here. Okay. So each bird that was found was bagged and tagged individually. This is evidence gathering at this point. So
when the lawsuit happens,
if it happens, yeah,
right.
you're prepared for it. So 1,085 dead seabirds, including 27 marbled murrelets, which is a threatened and endangered species. They live in the ocean. They nest in old growth forests, so they're really threatened. The studies by the biologists estimate that there were 2,400 seabirds died, including 262 marbled murrelets, which is a significant number in that local population. And then they estimated that there were 672 shorebirds that had died. In that environment with all those storms, a lot of those bodies get washed out to sea, so you never see them. Then they set up a morgue, bagging and tagging, measuring. This is evidence handling. There's a chain of custody like in any other law enforcement operation. And not everybody gets to do this. So in this case, there are law enforcement officers involved in this. Okay, in the old days, prior to 1987, when you had an oil spill, you would go in and clean it up, and you were done. And you cleaned it up by digging up beaches, by steam cleaning rocks. 1987, the Department of Interior issued regulations for natural resource damage assessment. So that if you had a spill or you had like a Superfund site, when you cleaned it up, you weren't done. You had to restore the natural resources back to what it was prior to the spill or a release. And this provided natural resource trustees, they were designated land management officials for the Department of Interior, Department of Agriculture, and for each state, the governor designated a natural resource trustee. Sometimes it remained with the governor to be involved in the assessment and possible lawsuits to have these natural resources restored. And the tribes are also trustees. One of the things that I was approached by the spiller, they had all this heavy equipment there for the cleanup and for the response, and they were getting ready to decommission it. And they said, is there anything we can do to help with restoration with this equipment? Well, one of the things we did was flatten the beaches, take the sand dunes out. There's a Florida beach grass that has created these dunes, which is not a natural environment. And the snowy plover doesn't thrive in a dune environment. So one of the things we did, and again, this is federal land that we were working on, was level a lot of those dunes and create the habitat for the snowy plover. So we were able to do that early in the response and start to get those resources back working again for the snowy plover. Yeah, they're called responsible parties, the person who spills the oil. So the responsible party.
So they loaned him a backhoe
and they got credit for, I mean, when you do a natural resource damage assessment to determine, what was required and how much it's going to cost, they got credit for this because we were able to do it earlier and get that environment working for us quicker. There's a lot of people sometimes. It's the spiller, it's the owner of the product, it's the insurance companies.
And
Right.
everyone involved with them.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's, yeah. And so in a response, you usually have one person you're dealing with for decisions making on the response and on damage assessment. But there's a lot of parties involved on that other side. So for the snowy plover, in addition to that emergency restoration, we did habitat creation, maintenance for the open dune habitat once it gets there so it doesn't become dunes again. They recruited and trained volunteers, did public education about, riding your ATVs and stuff in snowy plover habitat, increased law enforcement and predator control.
So I think public education and communities can, play an important role.
Oh
in
yeah,
environmental
absolutely.
impact.
Yeah, especially for snowy plovers because they're in that environment where we want to play.
Right.
What I hear you say is this terrible event that caused a lot of problems.
Mhm.
Actually, it is a better place for,
In this one case, yes. Yeah,
so like a restoration piece.
right. It was a way to make up for the oil spill impacts of that
Is that
environment
next
is by
slide?
dealing with habitat and not necessarily, they dealt with the individuals and the habitat in this case.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to make mention, the slide before is the wetland delineation that happened. So there was wetland.
Could you go back one more? Yeah. Okay. That was for snowy plover. The next one, wetlands restoration. In this case, they took a diked farmland, they acquired it, and then they reestablished the tidal wetlands by more than just breaching the dike. But they did that and put that land under the abandoned National Wildlife Refuge. It became part of the refuge. And that was to help mitigate for the loss of some of the shorebirds, some of the waterfowl. Okay, next. So this was down in Bandon, and it was a targeted piece of property that, like I said, we adopted into the Bandon National Wildlife Refuge. Next. And a big player in all that was the Siuslaw tribe. This was historical fishing, hunting, and gathering areas for the tribe. And so this was a significant event. And this was after they did the restoration work within the area, they breached the dike. And the tribe used one of their historical canoes to go through. And it's, you think, well, it's a nice little PR move. I was standing next to tribal members that were actually crying when they saw this.
Yeah.
This was significant to the tribe. Okay, Marble Murrelet restoration. 4,300 acres of coastal forested land were acquired. It's hard to find old growth habitat that's not in private hands anymore. Actually, I believe the property that was acquired was Idaho Power owned it, if I remember correctly. So 1/3 was old growth, 1/3 roughly was managed to become old growth, and 1/3 was commercially managed to generate funds to manage this. And this was a plan that was developed by the Confederate tribes of the Coos, Lower, Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians. They are the ones managing the property for the trustees. And it's been a great operation. They've created quite a bit of habitat and are managing it for future old growth habitat, which that's not done very often anymore. Recreation impacts, they did trail maintenance, rehabilitation, paving of some parking areas, beach signage, maintenance and development of trails, some educational things. But the recreation was impacted because we had to close that beach. And they just from a safety standpoint. We had to keep it all out of there. Restoration cost a total of 25, almost $26 million was paid to the trustees from the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund that was established as part of the Oil Pollution Act, and then $4 million from the spiller for natural resource damages. Under the Oil Pollution Act, there's a limit of liability. And that depends on the ship, it depends on the oil. There is no limit of liability if it's a criminal investigation, if there's criminal charges brought.
Does that next slide show their responsibility?
No.
No.
So their responsibility for damage assessment portion of this was $4 million. They had reliability. They had liability for also the response costs, which were roughly about another $29-30 million, if I remember correctly.
So let's pause for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
So the spiller paid $4 million.
For natural resource restoration. And I don't know how much of the response costs for the oil spill cleanup. Actually, the Oil Liability Trust Fund was established under the OPA, Oil Pollution Act, and it was a tax on oil per barrel, and it's kept at $1 billion. So as you use it and it drops down,
Yeah.
they implement the tax again. Or a lot of times you use it for that emergency response that early on, and then the spiller will pay it back. Or you take them to court, you can sue them. But there is a limit under OPA, under Oil Pollution Act.
So for time's sake, we kind of have to come to a close. Do we have how many slides left? Four more slides.
Real quick. So in 2008, the stern section of the vessel was there. The governor had insisted that money be set aside for the removal of that stern. A lot of local folks were very upset because this was a tourist attraction.
Yeah.
They had, there was a little educational signs up there. So they brought in the salvage team and they went out there and essentially ripped this thing apart.
Yeah.
There was no oil left in it. It had all been cleaned out. The only oil that was released, and there was very little, was sitting under the ship when they removed it. And we had the beach monitored throughout the whole time. So total 400,000 gallons of oil were on board, 70 to 140,000 gallons spilled, 165 to 255 gallons burned. So that was a significant portion. And then the remainder, 60 to 100,000 gallons sank with the ship in very deep water.
So I have a question
Okay.
for you. This obviously was really important to you.
I've been on 1,000 oil spills. I've never been on anything like this.
And so it obviously impacted you because you've actually taught this class in different
Yeah.
ways.
I did it last summer for community college.
Yeah, you did it
back in
last summer, and you've done it for the Department of Interior. You've done lots of work with this. So, but we're kind of standing on the outside looking in, right? You were like on the beach. You actually crossed into the illegal zone and got in a little trouble.
A little bit.
Naturally. So what personal, let's come off the notes. What personal impact did this have on you? How did this change you?
It really didn't change me. I've been doing this for so long. The uniqueness of it. The thing that was the most rewarding is that what you don't see is the hours and all the time you put in developing these relationships. We did a briefing for my assistant secretary back in DC, and I had a guy named Tim Votaw from the Bureau of Land Management with me. And Tim said, when I walked into the room, the chief of operations, the chief of planning, and the incident commander all walked up to say hi. And I said, you don't do that. You do that ahead of time. The fact that it was the Coast Guard that had the wildlife trailer brought, we didn't have to argue with him. We didn't have to beg him. And then again, that's an educational process. And it was a credit to Captain Hall that that was important to him. You know, a lot of the guys we were dealing with that were older weren't used to dealing with the trustees.
What do you want us to know from this story?
Well, it's like you touched on earlier. I hadn't given this much thought about it. But, you know, it's this kind of
Surprise question.
wrote for me. He asked me why you asked me yesterday why did you clean birds?
Right.
I'd never given it any thought. I mean, it's something I've done my whole life, and I went, yeah, why do we do this? And you see pictures of oiled birds. How can you help yourself from
Right,
doing that?
right.
But when you have a population of a group of birds that has declined by 70%, it's important that we save as many as we can.
Yeah.
Marbled murrelets are very endangered, and to have the ability through this to acquire that habitat. And it was just how the response side of this has changed over the years, how they're concerned, and yeah.
When oil takes down into the skin, can you use enzymes to heal up a little bit? You know, like they do it, cats with catfish, they have a leaf on it. You use it to chew up the oil, the oil stuff. Is that possible?
Not on a beach like that, not in a system like that. But I'll tell you, for the Exxon Valdez, all that oil went into that intertidal zone with the rocks. And you could see them out there with steam cleaners cleaning the rocks. Well, there was a scientist with NOAA that said, I would like to have an area set aside where you don't clean it. And what he did was he did a study where he looked at the steam cleaning operation. He had a site set aside where they did nothing. And they had a site where they used biological agents. And essentially the worst operation was the steam cleaning. It killed everything.
Yeah, yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we had a nuclear submarine involved for some of it. We essentially blew up the ship. I'd never done that before. It was just very unique in the response and all the difficult decisions, weighing burning that oil with impacts from air quality, what trade-offs were there, and how well it went. I mean, we had to make some tough decisions in very narrow windows. And how well it went, how concerned everybody was about the environmental aspects of this. By the way, at Exxon Valdez, probably the best way of cleaning that beach up was leaving it alone.
Right.
It was not too much different from the one where they used biological agents.
Yeah, that was a good question. What was the scientific experiment that you using with the birds and what about the biological?
Yeah, it didn't increase it too much more rapidly than just leaving it alone. A quick note, after I retired, I worked as a consultant, and I went down to a pipeline spill down in Santa Barbara. And we had all these oiled rocks. And they were looking at cleaning individual, football-sized rocks. They set up a little bathtub to try it. And I'm just looking at that. So they said, well, we want to clean rocks that are 40% oil. And I said, well, how do you, you got it for the responders, the guys doing this on the beach. I said, you need pictures. So I picked up a cobble and I said, is this 40% oil? And they said, yeah. So I went to set it back down and I turned it over so the clean side was facing up. And I went, well, that looks pretty good. I got pulled out of that side of the operation for something else. When I came back into it, they hadn't made a lot of progress. What they were finding was just the surf action did the best job of cleaning the rocks without disturbing the environment that that little micro environment underneath the rocks.
Right.
And they got to a point where they started throwing rocks into the surf zone to get them clean because Mother Nature was doing a much better job.
Yeah.
It's out near Shenandoah. This in Santa Barbara, the pipeline was coming from oil wells out in the ocean. So they shut down those. Well, those oil wells were harvesting natural seeps. And when they shut that pipeline down, the natural seeps increased. And so actually the oil operation in this case was taking oil that was naturally seeping out of the environment. But in that environment with those natural seeps, there's bacteria there that eat the oil. And so there's a natural process that also works out there.
One of the most beautiful parts of this story, if you can find beauty amongst the spill. So we have $50 million spent, right? We have well over 15 agencies. We have the United States Navy. We have all of these people involved, and all because a few people made a few mistakes that led to a huge disaster. The benefit through the restoration work was the Native American people. And that's what I saw in your story, that a marginalized people, yes, it took $25 million to get to the restoration, but the Native American people, the benefactors of that work in people, yeah, we have environmental benefactors, we have all the benefactors, but I see that they got their land restored, and they got their waterways restored, and they got their fisheries restored. And I found that really beautiful, that was a benefit.
Well, the fact too that they were readily invited into the command center, that does not happen
Right.
in a lot of areas. And that goes to the relationships that have been developed in this region.
Right.
I mean, one of my jobs as the Secretary of Interior has a fiduciary responsibility to the Native Americans.
Right.
And my role is to make sure that we do that.
Yeah.
And so I negotiated their funding for him. But the fact that it's just, you don't think about it anymore, that of course we include them in this. And this was kind of the start of that way of thinking,
Right.
that they were so heavily involved
Right.
that they're actually operating, they're in control of the restoration of the murrelet. Much bigger, yeah. They're a natural resource trustee. They have equal standing in a damage assessment, and that wasn't always the case, and probably still is not the case in a lot of areas.
Right.
They're nations, yeah.
So let's thank Preston for being here with us today.